Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the third season of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I am Vlad, and my guest today is Dan Hannum, who, and bear with me, I'm going to introduce his position, but bear with me because he is not one of the guests that you'd hear on Pompliano's podcast. He's not one of those suits who talk about boring stuff. He is the CEO of Hannum Capital Management, and he's a fund manager, I guess, of his own company, and he works with Bitcoin. But trust me, he's a lot more interesting than the bland guests that you'd hear on other podcasts, which might be hosted by Pompliano.
Well, as much as I tend to agree, I'm definitely a big fan of his podcast and just the overall conversation that he brings to the ecosystem. But glad to be here with you and excited to talk some Bitcoin.
Okay, so what do you do more exactly? Are you having customers who buy Bitcoin through you?
Yeah, so a little bit of background on myself, and then I can go into what we do here at Hannum Capital. I have my experience is largely in traditional finance. So I got my MBA at the University of South Carolina here in the States. Went and spent about 3.5, almost 4 years on Wall Street between Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan. And after that, linked up with Brock Pearson on the Stevens Brothers at Blockchain Capital. Was there for about 2 years before starting Hannum Capital Management in late 2017. We raised our first fund from select LPs in 2017, and then a second fund in 2018. And pretty much have been scaling out not only our operations, but our investments ever since. Our investments are largely in the crypto ecosystem, largely in infrastructure, and tend to be in either seed or Series A rounds. So hopefully that wasn't too boring, but gives a kind of a picture of my background and what we're doing today.
Okay, so you have worked for a lot of investment firms on Wall Street. And why did you choose to get into Bitcoin? You could make a lot of money just sticking to traditional finance.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the way that I look at it is just what wakes you up in the morning and gets you out of bed, and what are you thinking about at night? And largely for me, I was in the high net worth individual portfolio management section of each individual asset bank. And for me, really, that wasn't the deal. It was always nice to make rich people richer, but for me, that wasn't what was getting me up in the morning. I got introduced to Bitcoin in early 2013 and fell down the rabbit hole shortly thereafter. And right around then, it was trying to find the right opportunity to devote my time and career into the space. Was lucky enough to find some really good people to help kind of reset some of the thinking in my brain from traditional asset classes valuations into the crypto ecosystem. At the time, it was pretty small as well, that there weren't that many funds or projects in the space. There wasn't that many investments going into traditional equity rounds. It was largely into ICOs that were the ICOs before the 2017 craze. So we worked on the Mastercoin ICO, which was one of the first, and then Ethereum. And then it was something that day by day that went in. I spent more of my time outside of the investment banks, focusing on the ecosystem, meeting with people, reading materials, looking at Medium, Reddit, Quora. So yeah, for me, it was more just like a fascination with what this potential technology could hold, what it could build. I'm definitely more on the anarchist side, which is funny coming from big banks. But yeah, it was something that kind of just sparked something inside of me. I was right around the age of 24, 25. So a little bit outside of college, but not too deep in my career, where I figured I can make a leap of faith, kind of devote the next 2 to 3 years into this ecosystem. If it pans out, that was the hope. And if it didn't, I had some pretty good names on my resume and some pretty good connections, and figured it wouldn't be too hard to get a job back in the banking sector and somewhere in finance. So that was kind of the origin story.
I guess that this week has been very interesting, that we have had the congressional hearings, and I guess by the time people listen to the podcast, it will be last week. But we have seen for the first time a tendency for congressmen and important people to distinguish between Bitcoin and shitcoins. And I guess it's part of the record on a congressional hearing, and it's part of American history that the word shitcoin has been legitimized. And my question to you right now is, do you witness this kind of phenomenon of people realizing the fundamental advantages and value of Bitcoin as opposed to other cryptocurrencies? Is there a greater demand for Bitcoin as opposed to everything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people follow somewhat of a similar path. And right before I get down the path, I definitely have to give a shout out to Tom Emmer and Patrick McHenry. They were both, in my opinion, very knowledgeable of the ecosystem, very much for innovation and building out the cryptocurrency ecosystem, and obviously seeing that there's a difference between Libra and Bitcoin. And then on the opposite side, I am located here in Los Angeles, in California. So Mr. Brad Sherman is unfortunately a representative of our fine state, and it was disheartening to see that in the 6 years between the last committee on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, that it doesn't seem like he's done much, if any history or research on the topic. So that was a little disheartening. But back to your question, I think the path that I see most of the time is people get interested in cryptocurrency through Bitcoin. And then once they get interested, they kind of have a false sense of being able to make returns in other assets. I think people have a general misconception that if you didn't invest in 2011, 12, 13, 14, and get into Bitcoin relatively early, that there's not much money to still be made, which I definitely disagree with. But I think people get started in Bitcoin, look into altcoins and other aspects. They think if a coin's trading at 30 cents, the likelihood that it goes to 60 cents or $1 is greater than Bitcoin going from 5K to 10K, 5K to 15K, and anywhere in that range. And then also, I think people just don't really understand the differences between Bitcoin and what other cryptocurrencies offer, the trade-offs between them. So kind of the cycle that I tend to see is people get in through Bitcoin, explore the ecosystem, realize that it can take as short as a couple of weeks or a couple months, but typically end up trending back to Bitcoin once they get a better understanding of the trade-offs that it's consciously made, the benefits that it offers, and then also understand that the potential for Bitcoin to increase monetarily is definitely in line with, or in my opinion, a better chance to appreciate more rapidly than other altcoins as well.
So demographically speaking, who are your customers?
So our customers, in a sense, are really what we call limited partners, or LPs. So we have 4 select LPs that distributed capital into our first fund and our second fund. So to me, our investors are our customers. Other than that, we're actively managing their assets and our own assets into seed and Series A rounds in the crypto ecosystem. So if anything, we don't really have customers in the sense that we're providing a product or a service. I guess our service is providing pretty much ultra high net worth individuals exposure to an asset class that they previously didn't have access to. A lot of our investors are fairly wealthy. They have either family offices set up, or real estate, or private equity, or hedge fund exposure. So when you look at most of the asset classes that they can invest in, they've pretty much checked off every box except for cryptocurrency. And I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, and had a track record not only in traditional finance but in crypto, and then with my own personal portfolio that I was able to convince some guys to give me a chance. So for us, really, our customers are our investors, and we try to act as best as we can to be stewards of their money, and not only protect them against downside risk, but ultimately maximize the upside reward as well.
I was actually much more curious to know the average age of your customers, because I guess it's mainly people who don't want to open their own, maybe Coinbase or Cash App accounts and buy on their own.
Yeah, so to give some insight on our first fund was a $50 million fund. So as you can imagine, it's probably more money than most investors are putting into a Coinbase account. Our average investor has upwards of 9 to 10 figures of net worth. their average check size when investing into a fund is typically in the 10 to 20, 10 to $30 million range. So at the time, I think they were looking for a portfolio manager and an investment officer that had experience not only allocating capital of that size, but had an understanding of the ecosystem. To answer your question as far as like age range, I believe our youngest LP is probably late 50s and our oldest in late 70s. So typically the older crowd who I think realized the potential of the asset class, but didn't care enough or just didn't have the time and the willingness to learn about the ecosystem, figure out how to actually deploy capital on their own. Most of our LPs are not fund managers or in the investment world. They have different people that manage their wealth for them. And I'm lucky enough to be the crypto side of their wealth management.
Yeah, I was thinking that this kind of situation where you entrust somebody to hold the assets for you, and basically in the case of Bitcoin, hold your private keys, is very convenient for somebody like my father, because he doesn't get the point of it. He sees it as some kind of speculative asset, doesn't understand the disruptive nature and how it can be the new gold in which you store your value and it cannot be confiscated. So if he was to invest into Bitcoin, he would probably go to somebody like you and make a greater investment than I ever can because he has more money than me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the private key issue and custody in general is definitely a hot topic, even in the last few years, and I think we'll be moving forward. Actually, had a tweet a day or two ago that self-custody versus third-party custody shouldn't necessarily be a binary choice. I don't think users, customers, investors in the ecosystem actually need to make that choice, whether it's not your keys, not your coins, or custody is the worst thing in the world. I think it's really an ever-evolving spectrum that should allow the greatest number of users to participate. We definitely have, from our LP and investment base, our investors are definitely not the type that want to deal with the security of managing their own assets, and definitely are comfortable with providing their private keys and their custody to our discretion. We amazing providers that offer custody solutions for us. And then on the other side, I think it does happen to be an age issue as well. Most of my friends or people that I went to school with, whether it's high school or college, I think they're generally more acceptable or welcoming to the idea of getting a Trezor, getting a ledger, securing their keys, understanding how to make the first couple transactions. Although I think it's risky in the sense that I think it's not necessarily risky, but I think it's just nerve-wracking. I think anytime that I've walked a friend or a colleague or family member through their very first Bitcoin transfer, it's definitely a nerve-wracking process. I think not only securing your private key, your information, your seed phrase and things like that, but then also making those transactions can definitely become a little bit easier. But I think that's also the trade-off that we make with Bitcoin, is the sense that we're making a pretty knowledgeable trade-off between security and usability. And I think as the security features continue to increase, the usability will continue to increase as well. But yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's not only a generational gap between overall tech abilities, but also just the dependence on your assets as well. I think when you're securing tens of millions of dollars, you typically are more welcome to making sure that it's done correctly. Whereas some of my friends maybe only have $1,000 or $5,000, which definitely I'm not saying is something that you want to get rid of or are happy if it disappears. But I think that's also an element of the custody equation as well.
Right, but basically, what kind of security do you offer that people cannot get with their own Trezor? Yeah,
so I don't think it's anything in the sense that you can't receive. I think it's just usability. We have our custody through Genesis and also through Gemini. So two pretty top-notch custody providers that provide more institutional grade custody. It's something that that I think just makes our LPs more comfortable knowing that there's a third party involved. Whereas I don't think there's anything wrong. I personally have a few different treasures, a few different ledgers, a keep key, a cold card. Pretty much any solution that I see comes out is something that I'm willing to give a try and learn about. But I think our LPs have a little bit different focus on being able to know that their assets are secure and safe. And I think there's providers that that provide a better solution than we could come up with. I think for us, it's really partnering with firms that provide solutions to our clients, whether it's a BlockFi or a company like that they can provide yields on BTC holdings, or if it's a company that provides custody as well. So I think that's kind of like the trade-off, in my opinion, is just the amount of assets that you hold can make a difference between a custody provider or a hard wallet solution. And I don't think there's, like I said, I don't think there's really a one size fits all. Pretty much all of my individual friends, family, colleagues, things like that, we definitely recommend getting a hardware wallet, getting your assets off of exchanges, and having the ability to keep that safe. But even with that, I think I have friends that keep their assets on Coinbase. That they use Coinbase. It's easy to use. The UX UI is probably the top notch from a centralized exchange point of view. I don't think the decentralized exchange structure is necessarily there on the UX UI side yet to get your average customer involved. So I have a ton of friends that keep their assets on Coinbase with Coinbase custody. So like I said, I don't really think there's like a right or wrong or a one size fits all solution.
So my next question to you has to do with the market cycles. And if you started your company back in 2017, I guess you have witnessed that phenomenal bull market. And then in 2018, you have seen it all go down gradually. And how do you describe your experience with your clients, basically? Because I guess they were watching the news and seeing how the price was going down. And did they question anything about Bitcoin?
Not necessarily. I think that the one big difference in the sense of how our firm is set up is we're largely a venture firm. So instead of having actively managed portfolios of token assets, we invest largely in seed and Series A rounds. So I think there's always a trade-off involved with that, in the sense that I think you can get additional liquidity, some additional returns on having an actively managed portfolio. But for us, largely 96% of our investments are directly into seed and Series A rounds. So the average lifespan of an investment that we're making into a company is typically anywhere between 4 to 10 years, depending on if they raise additional capital, if there's product market fit, those types of things. And obviously there's different metrics when you're investing in the seed round versus your Series A round. So I think it's definitely interesting, because I think anytime the price goes from 20,000 or 19.8 to 3,000 in a 12-month span, I think people definitely get worried about if the future's there. I think when the price goes down, the ability for teams to build can change. But I think you start seeing the ecosystem and the infrastructure needed to bring on the next million users gets built during the bear market. So I think as much as 2018 might not have been good for an actively managed portfolio or for an everyday retail investor, I think it was really good for a firm like ours that are investing in entrepreneurs and in companies that were building during that time frame, that are now getting set up to help onboard the next couple million users into the space.
Right. So let's talk about you as a person, because I guess you got to talk about your firm, but I'm curious to know what gets you most excited about Bitcoin right now. Is there any specific application or development which makes you very curious and keeps you interested to read the news every day and maybe think of ways of integrating it into your firm?
Yeah, I think layer 2 technology as a whole is definitely something that fascinates me. I think that was definitely one of the easier kind of arguments to be made before Lightning and before some layer 2 technologies came out, that the Bitcoin stack was just not there, that you weren't able to build things on top of the Bitcoin protocol I think the ability to not change the underlying protocol is a feature. So I'm very excited for Lightning and other layer 2 technologies to come out that can add different functionality without actually changing the underlying protocol. Lightning Network is definitely a big one. I think there's always a discussion between the store of value versus the payment use case. There's definitely a big divide between people who are investing in Bitcoin for a store of value, and typically the earlier investors that looked at it as an electronic cash system. I happen to agree with Murad. Mustap Murad is his Twitter handle. He has a really interesting chart kind of showing the delineation between having to actually become a store of value before a medium of exchange. But to get back on point, I think layer 2 technology is definitely something that fascinates me. To the ability to build up the Bitcoin stack allows us to really look at different features, such as like DeFi for one was such a big topic in for Ethereum, and now we're starting to see different technologies that can be built on top of Bitcoin that can actually replicate some of those features.
Did you ever try to mix your Bitcoins with Wasabi or Join Market or Samurai?
I am a big fan. I'm a big fan of Wasabi, of Samurai, of CoinJoin. I think that's something that really fascinates me about Snore and Taproot and Mast and some of these new proposals as well, is adding that ability of privacy to Bitcoin. I think that's also something that's not really talked about as often as it should be, in the sense that I think a lot of people that get into Bitcoin think that it's this untraceable token that no one can ever see. And you see that with firms like Elliptic and Chain Analysis that it's not as untraceable as you think it is. So I'm all for privacy. I think privacy is a fundamental right, especially when operating online. So I'm definitely a big fan of adding some of these privacy features to the Bitcoin protocol.
Okay. But what was your experience trying Wasabi, for example? Because when I first tried it, I found it frightening, the idea that your coins disappear and get into this coordinated process through which you have to complete the cycle, and then you receive your Bitcoins in small chunks and gradually. That was kind of, frightening, because I was thinking that there might be an error in the system and I might not get the coins back, even though that's impossible. And I have spoken to the lead developer, Adam, and he told me that it's all mathematical and algorithmic and there is no way for anyone to get screwed in the process. But it's still, different knowing that every transaction is immutable and there is no call to be made and say, okay, so I lost my funds, can you please return them?
No, I definitely agree, and I think that's kind of going back to the point of even on the wallets and on custody. I think there's I think the element of having some privacy definitely lends itself to more tech savvy users, in the sense that they may not understand the intricacies, which I certainly don't. I'm definitely not a coder myself. I'm not super technical. I couldn't tell you how Wasabi works. But I definitely experienced some of those same impressions of a little bit of being scared, a little bit of being unsure, definitely a little bit of waiting to make sure that it all worked. But I think that's kind of how it typically starts. It typically starts as more secure and a little bit more tech, and then ends up there's people that understand that it can be a little bit more user friendly, and I think that's what's going to be worked on in the next 6 to 12 months, is making features like Wasabi and CoinJoin a little bit more easy to use. But I think that's kind of the trade-off between not your keys, not your coins. So I think there may not be the type of user that is willing to self-custody and go through these steps to make sure that they're operating privately yet. And I think as we make that process easier and more user-friendly, it'll definitely increase the usage.
From your perspective, back in 2017, when there was the scaling debate and there was the Bitcoin Cash side, which split from the main chain, how did you perceive all the events with the New York agreements and all these people trying to change the main protocol?
Yeah, I mean, I think
I mean,
I
now
think
it's obvious. You can look at it and say it was a good idea to stick to the store of value narrative. But back in the day, it was hard to have any kind of accurate prediction of what was going to happen. In a sense, the big block narrative that the number of transactions would subsidize miners more effectively than I forgot my point, but anyway, the big block narrative was eluding in a sense. And I remember being caught into these RBTC, which is the Bitcoin Cash subreddit, RBTC discussions, in which they were saying that Blockstream is funded by Wall Street and it's evil and it has these conspiracies going on, and that Bitcoin Cash is trying to preserve the original vision, and that they have Gavin Andreessen who supports the project, and Gavin has been basically the leader of Bitcoin for a long time. And I wasn't very much involved in the space at the time, and getting to this kind of discussion made me really think that it's difficult with Bitcoin, and it kept me away for a while from getting involved much more. And I'm actually curious to know how it looked like from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think in one sense, I think that's something that I generally like, in the sense that if you believe that you can fork the protocol and create a better Bitcoin, then I'm all for it. I think what is determined is ultimately the adoption. And as you can see with Bitcoin Cash between Bitcoin Core, I think the miners and the general ecosystem and users have definitely sided more towards Bitcoin Core. I think the hard part in the sense is I think it got way too personal way too quickly. And I think it became more of like a personal kind of X crusade than it was like a tech principle. I think there's always kind of a challenge in the ecosystem between having like funded organizations like Blockstream, blockchain, that info and things like that have their own ideas. But I think that's something that I've come to enjoy is the overall user consensus model that Bitcoin has, and the ability for even larger institutions or corporations or individuals that may think a different way. It's ultimately up to the miners and the users to decide which fork they're going down. And I think, as you mentioned, hindsight's definitely 2020. It's easy to look back and see that I believe the decision to keep the block size smaller was definitely the right one. I think what a lot of people overlook as well is when SegWit was introduced, the block size actually increased a little bit. So I think that was helpful. And I think the other thing that was just a little bit detrimental was Roger Ver and kind of his crew that have the Bitcoin.com address and the BTC Twitter handle. So I think it was a realization that even even some early adopters like Roger that has done a lot to build Bitcoin to what it was, kind of had their own kind of self-clout that I think allowed the Bitcoin Cash side of things to even have kind of a chance. But yeah, I mean, I think it was an interesting thing. I think a lot of good came out of it. I think one thing that I think could be improved upon is trying to have in-person meetings and try to have more face-to-face discussions around this. I think what I've realized is Twitter is a pretty poor medium for thoughtful exchange, especially when you're disagreeing. And I think a lot of the battle was held out on Twitter, which has character limits, and sometimes you're not able to get through your point correctly. So I think there's a lot of bad and a lot of good that came out of it. And I think ultimately Bitcoin Core, the actual protocol, is definitely stronger for having gone through some of the hard fork battles of 2017.
I disagree with you, and I guess you have iterated the argument of Eric Voorhees during the Bitcoin 2019 conference. He said pretty much the same stuff, but in the case of something which is open and it's supposed to be run by the nodes and the users who decide which side of the protocol they are following, it's useful to have the discussions in a public place and in a way which can be followed and which can get feedback from people who might not be in New York and might not be millionaires, but they run their own node and they have their own voting power. And maybe that in-person meetings are good to establish connections and be able to have better human relations. But at the same time, when it's something as serious as the Bitcoin protocol itself, it's useful to have public debates. And trolling aside, I think Twitter is very good in terms of sending messages and getting the community engaged. Otherwise, it would be just like another big financial corporation where you have a few shareholders who get to make the decisions and everybody else just hears some kind of distorted press release, which doesn't cover everything in terms of arguments and in terms of concerns. That's why I think all this toxicity by Bitcoin maximalists, it seems maybe deterring in the short term. Maybe some people did not get into Bitcoin specifically because they felt intimidated. But it was good in terms of preserving the community and building something from a grassroots perspective, as maybe that the growth of Bitcoin in terms of adoption was stunted in some sense. And it did not become this generally accepted mean of exchange in some stores, like there was a trend back in 2014 maybe. But it's beneficial for the community to understand the fundamentals. And if you agree that Bitcoin should not be changed, and you create a community which seems to agree with it, and you have a larger number of people who run their own nodes, then that's beneficial in the long run. And it's going to grow organically, as opposed to having a company like, I think it's BitPay, which is owned by Roger Ver, and it was the payments processor responsible for most of the partnerships in which Bitcoin was accepted with merchants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, I think, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think everything that went on was handled in the right way. To give you some input from my end, I was definitely a spectator. I was definitely not in any closed doors meetings or anything like that. I definitely agree that I think those types of meetings are detrimental. I guess my point was just, I think on topics like that, where there is so much not only tech involved, but also community consensus involved, I think, and maybe there's just a better way to have that discord online, whether it's through Reddit or another channel. I just think Twitter might not be the best solution. However, I think crypto Twitter is a fascinating place. I get a lot of value and overall kind of joy in going back and forth with different people on different topics. I just think when it's something as serious as that, having an ability to articulate your position in over 280 characters might be beneficial moving forward.
I guess I can agree with this, but at the same time, it's good to be concise and formulate your argument in a comprehensive way. And if you have a larger point to make, you can just share an article or a Reddit post.
That's true. It's true. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm definitely not. I don't have my feet set in the stone that it's the right way or the wrong way. I think, like you said, you can definitely write up kind of a long form dissertation or agreement or disagreement into an article or a blog, and then share that through Twitter. So yeah, like I said, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong or right about that. I guess my overall feedback is just looking back on kind of like the fork wars. It's easy to look back and maybe have a better understanding of how everything played out than kind of being in the nitty gritty of it during that couple week span.
Did you have lately any clients who demanded to buy Bitcoin Cash?
Not necessarily. Like I said, most of our investments are in seed and Series A rounds. So our liquid portfolio is definitely pretty small. Luckily, we have a board that we meet on when we're making investments into our liquid portfolio. So I think it's more just I think it's more just if our LPs are interested in learning more, hopefully sending them some good links and articles and explaining the difference between the actual protocols than it is like having an LP come in and demand that we make an investment. I think that's kind of the difference and trade-off between having a fund and with LP structure, in the sense that if our investors kind of believed in their ability to make those decisions for themselves and dedicate the time, the capital, the resources to making their own investment decisions, I don't know if they necessarily would invest in our fund. So I think we ultimately try to do a good job of explaining and articulating our investment thesis and why we are investing in things that we do. But we haven't necessarily had like anyone come in and say, you need to put money here or there, for example.
Yeah. And I guess right now the narrative of the big block Bitcoin has kind of faded. And it also has been divided with the BSV camp, and that side is just crazy in some degrees.
Yep.
They have basically defeated the whole point of Bitcoin with their idea of unlimited blocks and basically storing everything in their blocks, from pictures to videos to anything else.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but I think there's like 5 or 6 different Bitcoin forks between Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin SV, Bitcoin Cash, and so on and so forth. So I think the harm that it does is it causes your traditional investor that maybe doesn't know the difference between what the trade-offs are involved to be a little bit confused. I know I have friends that didn't really understand what Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash was. Same thing with like Ethereum versus Ethereum Classic. So I think sometimes forks can be a little bit difficult for like a retail investor to get through the differences, the trade-offs, understand where they want to put their money. I think at the same time, at the end of the day, a lot of retail investors just want to put their money where they think that they can gain more. They might not actually care about the tech or the trade-offs involved. But yeah, I mean, Bitcoin SV is definitely something that's just fascinating to watch. I mean, I think as you see Fake Toshi get caught in his web of, in my opinion, just kind of outright lies and just things that he says that he can't back up, and the testimony involved between, I think he had hearings like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then has an update or an upcoming like litigation with Peter McCormick and things like that. I think I'm fascinated to see how that whole escapade will turn out. I obviously am not 100% sure that who or they or she or what Satoshi is or was. I strongly don't believe that it was Craig Wright. And that's just my opinion.
Do you think that the fact that Bitcoin has no known creator or creators is detrimental to investments? And some people just say, if I don't know who created this, I will not put my money in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has 2 clear advantages actually. Having the leaderless ability is something that another Bitcoin can't fork away. So you can't actually fork away the creation story of Bitcoin and also the time in which it was released. So I think a lot of people forget about 2008, not necessarily forget about, but I think the timing of when Bitcoin was released, having an anonymous founder that isn't the CEO, there isn't directly involved, is actually an advantage. And then also on an additional point, I think as you start seeing with Facebook and with Libra, I think not having a CEO that you can call in to testify or having a company that you can subpoena is a really big advantage for Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, I agree with you, and this is the right answer. But when I think of investment firms and management capital funds or whatever, I think of the generation of my father, of baby boomers and Gen Xers, and it's them who have this kind of mindset in which they have to trust somebody. And when they see, for example, my father, when I try to explain to him that Bitcoin has no known creator, he told me that's not something that can be trusted because there is nobody you can hold accountable. And
yeah, I mean,
that this kind of mindset is not singular to my father, and it's generational.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, I think that's, excuse me, I have some insight coming from traditional Wall Street as well, where you have quarterly earning calls. You have the ability to speak directly to the management team. You have better better insights into how the company operates and functions. So it was definitely something that took a little bit to get used to. I think it's an advantage. I think it definitely raises questions. But I think overall, having what are we now, 10 years of having Bitcoin alive and well, I think that the Lindy effects that creates of not going away, of having people try to hack it, having people try to fork it, just makes it stronger. So I think it's all about like framing. So I think it's making sure that you describe the advantages in a way that just kind of showcase why not having a CEO or a figurehead is important. But I do agree with you. I think for instance, my mother has some BTC holdings, and I think she was in that same camp of trying to find the CEO online and trying to find the company and trying to find where the address was and things like that. So I think it is a little bit of a generational divide, but I think that happens with new technology. I think, and I'm sure this is something that you've heard a bunch of times, but if you told someone about Airbnb and Uber 10, 15 years ago, it was literally what my parents grew up teaching me not to do. Don't go in strangers' houses and don't go in strangers' cars. And then you now have the ability to kind of have that peer-to-peer trust. Obviously, there's an organization involved with Airbnb and with Uber, but I think as the peer-to-peer economy continues to grow, the trust in a centralized organization continues to diminish, and you start trusting your peers. And I think that's something that is obviously big in Bitcoin of don't trust but verify. And I think the ability for people to run full nodes and actually see the transaction history way back to the Genesis block, if they so choose to. I know a lot of people that don't have full nodes, but I think that gives people a sense of comfort. But I definitely agree. I think the older crowd is not used to having an investable asset class like that. But when you look at it from like a store of value investable idea, when you try to equate that to like gold, there's definitely companies and organizations that have built up around gold, but there's not like a central figurehead that mints the gold. And I guess that gets into religion, if you believe in religion and having someone who created the earth and things like that. But I guess my point being is from a store of value perspective. When you look at like gold, it's definitely, there's not really like a CEO of gold company or a person that has their face behind that. So I don't know, maybe that's just too much rambling, but I guess that's my perspective.
I guess in hindsight, the comparison with gold is useful, even though some people disagree and say that no, Bitcoin is not digital gold, it's programmable money in the way of allowing you to save. But when you present it to people who have never heard of Bitcoin and cannot understand the advantages of it, if you say it's digital gold, which cannot be confiscated and cannot be censored, I guess some people will see the value a lot faster if you present it like this. And I guess Saifedean, through his book, The Bitcoin Standard, has found an angle which is useful in terms of introducing Bitcoin to new people.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, I'm a big metaphor fan, and I think that the more metaphors and likeness that you can provide when introducing people to new technology, the new ideas, it helps them just rationalize it. And I think it's something that I had to go through when I first got into the industry of people even doubting Bitcoin. And then just kind of walking them back through how money has progressed is definitely such an easy way. I think Saifedean has done a great job, but I think even if you look back to 30, 40 years ago, when people first were issued credit cards, that was kind of a mind-blowing idea to say that, okay, now all of your assets are on this piece of plastic, and you go around to different stores and you swipe it, and somehow it all like adds up. So I think there's use cases that you can go back to, and maybe they're not one-to-one, they're exact replicates, which I don't think there's really anything, but I think there's enough similarities between either technologies or different use cases of technologies that help people just conceptualize what's going on. And I think when you get people that actually kind of understand the big picture, that's when they start diving into what makes Bitcoin different, what makes it valuable, what makes it something that they should invest in or spend time on. So I'm definitely a big fan of making real world equivalents or things like that, where you're using something that someone may understand, and then kind of using that to explain Bitcoin, so they get that kind of aha moment.
Do you ever get this impression that Bitcoin might be a cult? This is a recurring question throughout the show, but it's interesting to get different answers from the guests.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a cultist element to Bitcoin, and I think the shared belief that it'll continue to increase is definitely something that's for Bitcoin. I think that the main kind of overall consensus that you hear most people talk about when they talk about money is that it's a belief system. So what makes the dollar valuable? We believe, and the U.S. government backs up that it's valuable. What made, going back to like the Safedine analogy, what made seashells or rocks valuable? People believe that they were worth value, things like that. So I think that's one aspect is the more people that believe that it's valuable that get involved, it's definitely something that increases the network. And I think with a cap supply, just kind of like simple supply and demand economics kind of show that if more people are holding and more people are buying, that the price naturally increases. I mean, I think that actually helps the Bitcoin bull case in the long run of my opinion, that I think we need to become a store of value first, before we become a medium of exchange and can be used for payment. So to answer the question more specifically, I think there's definitely a cultist element. I think radical ideas in general have a cultist element. I think there takes the early adopters to make a technology real and to get people interested in it. I think there's been such a warm welcome, not only through anarchists, but technologists, but traditional finance people like myself that have got into the industry that believe in kind of the long-term value. And I think there's definitely a group of people that are the hodlers that are going to hold on forever. And I think there's people that are in it just to make a quick buck or are more interested in the USD value. And I think that's something that's also interesting to bring up as well, is a lot of my close friends are more interested in the, unfortunately, in the appreciation of their dollars. So they want to invest in it when it's 10K and then get out when it's 20K and double their money. I'm more in it for the accumulation of Bitcoin. So I think it's kind of a mindset switch from looking at things through a BTC lens versus a fiat accumulation lens. But yeah, I think there's definitely a cultist element to it. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Sometimes I think of Bitcoin and I draw parallels to the Protestant church, as the purpose of Protestantism was to make people read the Bible and make their own impression of it, as opposed to trusting a central authority like the Catholic Church, which was telling them how to interpret the scripture. And the whole don't trust, verify movement is very similar to that. And also it's interesting to see how people quit their jobs and basically bring their skill set into Bitcoin one way or the other. When people discover Bitcoin for the first time, they get caught up and then they think, how can I use the skills that I have to bring value into this? And this is what makes me think of it as more of a church or a cult, because in cults, you see people who give up on their lives just to be able to serve that greater purpose. The main difference is that we are financially incentivized to do it, as opposed to cults, which are all about the promise of an afterlife.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting topic. I mean, I think one of the things that I typically ask like my friends when they're getting into Bitcoin, especially, is understanding or asking them what money is. And I think the amount of people that have just kind of believed that our money is worth something that just don't understand what money actually is and what it's used for is really the first place I go. So for me, it's more of a question of why. Like, why are you interested in Bitcoin? What makes it interesting for you, other than making additional fiat dollars from it? So I think that's kind of like the first case, which I think you brought up in the sense of showing people the white paper, or providing articles and things like that give kind of like an overview of what this technology is about and what it can do to separate the state and the money. And I think as you start seeing the macro environment continue to dissipate, which I know probably most retail consumers are not as interested in, as far as like as a macro financial system, but I think the overall trust in corporations and government has continued to decrease. So people start questioning their leadership and questioning why they're trusting in things. And I think that's a good thing. And I think as more people ask that question of why more often, they start being led to other solutions and other organizations. And I think as more people unfortunately fall into poverty and have their wealth either confiscated or diminished through hyperinflation or even just regular inflation, they're looking for better alternatives. And I think Bitcoin is definitely the best alternative out there. So I think having the ability to start questioning things, not only in Bitcoin and in crypto, but in life, is such a massive advantage. Because once you understand why or why not, then you can start making your own opinions on things like that. So I have friends that have looked into Bitcoin and it's not for them. As much as I can protest and provide articles and examples and scriptures and things like that help them hopefully open their eyes and see what's building. There's people that just don't believe in digital money, which is funny because most of our fiat money is digital anyways. But I guess the point is, well, having more people questioning why and seeing that the institutions and governments and corporations typically aren't to be trusted or don't have the right incentives in line for their users, is leading to, I think, an overall revolution and evolution in people interacting with each other, and then also in the evolution of the separation of state and money.
Yeah, to somebody like my father, that's a very wild concept. And he just tells me when we try to talk about Bitcoin, because it's hard to debate anything with him, because he's an old school economist and he has very fixed opinions about matters. And to him, the idea of Bitcoin is some sort of adolescent movement of people who did not accept to grow up and accept the financial system in which they live. And they're trying to be dreamers and create and establish a financial environment for themselves. But I guess it's their fault, because we were the ones who were born into a situation in which our nations are in debt and we have to work for most of our lives to pay the debt that we did not make.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. I think that's the other aspect of like the Bitcoin revolution. Is not only in 2008, 2009 when you had kind of the banking and financial meltdown, but I think the debt ceiling is something that people are becoming more and more aware of. And I think I don't know the exact stats, but I was looking at something the other day that I think by 2026, the entitlements in America alone, as far as like Social Security, welfare, things like that, exceed the tax revenue. So at that point, how do we actually afford and pay for the things that we've promised to our citizens, especially in that older age, especially the people that have worked for 20, 30, 40 years and are counting on Social Security and their pensions and things like that to not only retire, but to survive. And I think the debt aspect is a big piece. There's a lot of people that are fed up with not having any say in what our country is doing, with what we're printing. And I think the military has a big impact on that. I think our country spends an insane amount of money into military instead of into infrastructure and into its own citizens and its own country. So I think the debt is definitely a big piece. I think it's interesting. I get this all the time from my friends that are a little bit upset with paying maybe student loans in the sense that their student loans are at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%. And sometimes their minimum payments going right towards the interest and nothing's going to principal. I think you see that sometimes that gets overemphasized in articles that someone has loans of $50,000 from 10 years ago, and after paying it every month on time, that they now owe $49,000. So it's like the debt crisis, not only through student loans, but from an overall government perspective, is something that honestly scares me and frightens me. And I think our generation is more interested in trying to find a solution and is less inclined to trust government to provide that solution as each day goes by, as more money is printed, and as our debt continues to climb with no likelihood of ending anytime soon.
Yeah, you just made me realize that while some of us believe in a new financial system, which we establish on the basis of Austrian economics and sound money, others just trust the government when they promise that they can just pardon debt and say everything that you owed to the government from your college days is going to be forgiven. But that's not really a pardon. It's not like they delete the debt. They have to print more money, or they have to overtax in order to be able to pay for your 50K of student loans.
Yeah, it's as someone who's definitely an advocate for sound money, it's something that somewhat upsets me in the sense that these political slogans of erasing student debt or providing stipends of thousands of dollars each month to every citizen, I just think there's such a divide between how our money should work and how it does work. And I think as long as we can continue to print more of it, the ability to not pay back our debts will continue to increase. And even yesterday and the day before, during some of the congressional hearings, you saw, I can't remember the exact congressman, but you saw some congressmen kind of allude to the fact that we can always print more money. And I think that might be a scapegoat for them, but I think it's a giant warning sign, and a big red flag for people that understand that there's really no way out of that. And it's like when you look at 08, 09, especially in America with the bank bailouts, it's like how many times are the citizens going to be called on to bail out the institutions that we decide to put trust into, whether they're banking, whether they're government. And I think that goes back to kind of the overall theory of Bitcoin, in the sense that people are more willing, due to the lack of trust in institutions and in government, to even give Bitcoin a try or try to understand what it's doing. And I think when people get educated on what's going on, not only the supply cap, but the supply schedule, how mining works, things like that, then they started actually understanding how a system like that could be a lot better. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a really uncomfortable situation to be in a country who seems to answer every question with printing more money.
I wouldn't want to be American right now, because you have so many issues and there's no clear answer to it. And there's the rise of populism in this regard, with people who promise radical solutions which cannot be delivered in any way, from the wall and all the way to let's pardon all student debt and let's just make a socialist state like Denmark in the United States. That's, two flavors of utopia which clash. And then you have the UBI, the universal basic income. Yeah, you have people like Andrew Yang who promise to give you $1,000 a month, and start questioning, the very foundation of money. If they can just gamble with it like that and make it worthless, then
yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, my last part was what's next. So they start with your money, they basically make it worthless, and then they're going to dismantle the whole value of the society.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've even started to see that happen. I was reading an article today that I retweeted, trying to find out who it was from a handle called BTC Sessions. And it's kind of the my path to Bitcoin maximalism, which I know we discussed on here. Could be another topic, but basically they give a kind of a brief history of the United States and of money, of going from the gold standard to having gold confiscated, to not allowing citizens to hold their own gold, to then that led to fractional reserve, of allowing banks to reserve out more than they had, which is just a downward spiral. So I think in the last 80 to 90 years. I think that was in 33 is when the gold was confiscated, and then 34 the fractional reserve started to process, and then in 71 or 72 you had Nixon taking us off the gold standard. So I think when your money started to not become redeemable, and could just be kind of printed at will, that's when like the downsides of our economy started to happen. Like you said, it's definitely a frightening thing to realize. And I think there's a lot of people that just don't even think about that. They go through their day by day. They go to their office from 9 to 5. They come home. They go to the grocery store. They do their thing, and their day is not being affected too much. But when you start looking into how our money is being issued, how it's being spent, where it's coming from, where it's going, there's no other option to realize that like the system is fucked, which is a very scary thing to live under. And then you not only look at the debt, but you look at who the leadership is. And I think that's the other challenge is going back to some of those slogans that you mentioned, such as like Andrew Yang and Warren and these types of people that are kind of just giving away things. I think there's an inherent like a divide between people that are fed up with the system for not providing the resources that they need, but then being clung, I don't know the right verbiage, but being kind of reliant on the system to provide them something else. So they're not like getting off the system. They're saying, okay, the system failed me in this way, but this guy's promising that he'll do it a different way. And as you've seen over hundreds of years, I mean, the amount of politicians in the United States that say something that is a good slogan or gets some press or coverage or votership on their side, and then actually don't follow through on half the things that they say, it's just really concerning as well. But it kind of goes back to like the money side of things. I think most people don't look into what money is and what politics are, and they don't see that there's other options and other solutions. And frankly, they just don't know that they exist. I think that the political revolution will probably be next, but I think it's taking the ability to print money out of the hands of the politicians that'll help us hopefully bring in new governance, whether it's through centralized politicians or democratically elected officials or things like that. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. There's as much as I'm born and bred and raised in America, there's definitely a lot of things that I don't agree with, that I don't like, and I think that aren't being run efficiently or effectively.
You know, the United States dollar right now has a 2% inflation, and it's one of the most stable currencies on the planet. And I guess you have to be aware of the fact that there are countries around the world right now which have hyperinflation. And for example, I come from Romania and I live here, and my parents have a history of raising money during their wedding in 1989. And within a couple of years, when they wanted to buy a car with that money, it used to be enough, but due to hyperinflation, they could only buy one couch for the living room. And just imagine having your dreams broken and destroyed by the hyperinflation in your country.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely something that somewhat frightens me in the sense of the global macroeconomic situation as well. I think there's a lot of stuff that's not right in America, but I think that there's a lot of countries that are facing much worse, whether it's Romania, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Zimbabwe. But I think it all typically stems back from having people in charge of the money supply, and not having software or having code and having math involved. So as long as you give people the control and the ability to print money, and as long as that continues to enhance what their goals are, I think they'll continue to do that. And I think greed is a human emotion that's not going anywhere anytime soon. And unfortunately, when we have these figureheads that I think some people think are infallible or that genuinely have our best interests involved, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. And I think there's just a lot of inefficiencies with how governments are run. But even like to give you kind of an example of some of kind of that same general feeling, when we look at like the school system, going back to the student loan issues in America, that's somewhat the same. Like my parents, even 30, 40, 50 years ago, could work part-time or full-time and actually afford to go to university and get a degree. Nowadays you can't. So you have to either take out loans, get a scholarship, or have parents that have wealth to put you through school without student loans. I think that's something that our economy is kind of being hit upon. I think that's why you hear the student loan topic all the time, because the younger generations, we're not going out there and buying houses, and we're not going out there and starting businesses, and we're not going out there and being entrepreneurial and things like that, because our ability to take those risks are so minimized because of the debt burden that we have. So I think debt and inflation are just two different sides of kind of the government problem that affect nations in all shapes and sizes. So I wish I had an answer, but I definitely believe that Bitcoin can provide a solution for some of those problems. And I think once we take out the ability for our governments to print money at will without any sort of consequence and without any sort of oversight, and I mean actual oversight, not government committees that are oversight committees, blah, 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 but actual oversight into where that money is going, how it's being spent, how it's being allocated, is something that will continue to happen. It's like giving a kid an allowance and giving him $100 every week, and then he comes back asking for more money the next week. And it's like, what'd you spend it on? I don't know. Whatever. And you never ask, and you just keep giving him money and keep giving him money and hope that one day he'll stop spending it. But when you keep giving people things that they haven't earned, it gives them the sense that they can just get more of it. And I think going back to the entitlement and tax related issue, our tax revenue is starting to not be able to continue to benefit the entitlements and the guarantees that we've made to our citizens. So when our government is not able, it's bad now, but when we can't even bring in enough revenue to support the bloated institution that is the United States government, what's going to happen then? So it's definitely something that concerns me, but I think helps the bullish case for Bitcoin in the sense that more people are getting screwed over, which is not a good thing. But as each person that you know suffers, you start looking for alternatives, and I think people are starting to turn towards Bitcoin and crypto in general, and the some of these issues that I think can be solved through technology and software.
Actually, it's these moments when you realize that the government cannot pay back all the social security, that you realize that it's run like a Ponzi.
Yep.
Because supposedly you work for your entire life, and you're supposed to have some kind of funds that are saved by the state after you pay your taxes, and they're going to return to you when you get older, right? That's how it should function in theory. But in practice, they just recklessly spend your money. And they say, well, we'll figure out a way to tax people along the way so that we're going to pay the pension of this 70-year-old at some point. But it doesn't work like that. It's more of a Ponzi. They take money from one side. They have to neglect something in order to be able to pay something else. And I guess I saw a recent debate that you had about the 9/11 witnesses demanding for special Social Security. I'm not sure if it was about a special pension or something. But Senator Rand Paul went on and said, we cannot afford to pay this. They just started a huge social media campaign and said, no, these people are evil because they're not giving more money from the government to these people who think they're entitled to receive more money.
Yes, it's definitely a hot topic all today that I've seen, especially across social media. I think in one sense, it frustrates me because I believe our responders on 9/11 sacrificed their life and sometimes their family's life to go try and help and save other people. So it upsets me in the sense that we don't have the ability to make them whole. Some of them ran into burning buildings that had materials that were burning that caused cancer and lung disease and all types of nasty stuff that now they're suffering from and they're dying from, and their families can't be supported when they're not there. So a large side of me really is frustrated. And then there's a small side of me that somewhat not agrees, because I don't know the politically correct way to get this point across, but I think it's interesting to see that there are some politicians that are somewhat raising kind of a flag saying, where is this money going to come from? And how long are we going to have to pay these benefits for, let's say, some of the firefighters or policemen that were maybe 18 or 19 at the time, which was 20 years ago. So they're still in their 40s. So that's what, 30, 40, 50 years potentially that we need to pay these entitlements and benefits for. Where's that money coming from? But I think that goes, in my opinion, goes back to the military equation. I think the United States spends an absurd amount of money on our military, on bases, on the militarization of everything, that we don't even take care of our own veterans. So I think that's something that also frustrates me as well. Is there's such a position to give benefits and healthcare and things like that to immigrants that are migrating here, which I'm not against. But I think we need to start taking care of like our own citizens first. And I think we've gotten to the point where I think we just egotistically believe that we're better than everyone else. And this whole spreading democracy of just going into countries and taking over and saying, we don't like how you operate, here's democracy, good luck with it, creates unrest, creates conflict. But I think that's why we have such a big problem, because in my opinion, we spend an insane amount of money on our military that could be used to fund some of these programs, instead of funding the largest military in the world, especially when we have technology like nukes and things like that I don't know if you need I don't know how large our military force is, but I think that's I guess ultimately my point is there's no oversight in where that money is going. So to have the debate around where the money's coming from, I think we need to start off with understanding where is anything going. And I think that's what I kind of look at from like some of my experience with private equity is largely when I was in private equity, we were responsible for coming into a business that was operating okay, not great, and understanding where inefficiencies were, understanding how that business could be operated better, whether it was bringing in new leadership, providing new products, better R&D, X, Y, Z. But I think you always start off with the capital. You look at how is money coming in, how is it going, and business can be kind of defined by like a spreadsheet like that. And I think there's nothing especially in the United States, that's looking at how much money is coming in, where is it going, how is it being allocated, and who's making those decisions. And I think that just really frustrates me, because I think we bring in enough money. Like our taxes go up every other year. I'm in California, so the amount of tax that I pay, not only to my local but state and then federal government, is relatively insane. And it's like you look at the infrastructure that's not there. Like our roads aren't fixed, our school systems aren't the best. Where is that money going? And I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think anyone does. And I think that's kind of an issue that just gets swept under the rug, unfortunately.
At the same time, it makes you wonder. Well, before I get to this point, I just want to say that in the case of the first witnesses, it's kind of a Pandora's box kind of situation, because once you give them money, then you're going to have the war veterans who will come and demand for their own slice of the pie. They're going to say, oh, but we did so much more than this. We went to Afghanistan and Iraq and all these countries, and we basically risked our lives every day, not just during that one day when the United States was under attack for the first time in 200 years or something. So yeah, it's a Pandora's box. It sets a precedent for other people to step in and demand for their own entitlements. But at the same time, you have to wonder, if we reach a world in which Bitcoin becomes the currency, like the standard, then is it going to be much fairer than what we already have?
I mean, that's a great question. I don't know that I have an answer to that. I definitely agree with you going to the first part of that in the sense of where does it end. I think that's another big divide in America of looking at military veterans and the lack of support that they receive when they come home, whether that's through PTSD or whether that's helping finding them new jobs or healthcare and things like that. You see a ton of homeless veterans. You see veterans that unfortunately commit suicide because of their experiences protecting America and things like that. So I think you definitely summed it up in the sense that if you start somewhere, where does it end? How does it end? And where does the money come from? And then what was the second part?
It was about Bitcoin and establishing a financial system around it, as it's good to have some money, but at the same time, we have to be better than what we are seeing in politics right now. Because there is the risk of people who are into Bitcoin right now and criticize the system to end up replicating the same kind of behavior that we are seeing once they become maybe the financial elites of the world. And it's important to be voluntarist up until the end and be able to donate money to different causes and make sure that the society at large benefits from our involvement and our participation in it. And we don't force anybody or any party to inflate the supply at any point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree, especially on the supply side. I think there's probably smarter people than me that can hopefully put together a solution for how do we govern a state that's not operated through government and through fiat currency. So I think it's a debate that I don't think any is going anywhere anytime soon, and hopefully we'll have more proposals or more resolutions for how to do this. And I think you're starting to see that on a small scale with some projects, whether it's through staking or whether it's through different governance procedures. It's kind of just starting to test out how obviously right now we're kind of focusing on like how the protocol evolves, but I think that like decentralized governance can have a big impact on how other things are operated. It's yet to see if that will work, but I think that excites me. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just like a challenging aspect to replicate the good things that government provides, but not the bad things that they provide. And I think that's also something that somewhat irritates me in the sense of some kind of Bitcoin maximalists who are not advocate. I don't know if advocating is the right word, but that are envisioning kind of like a dystopian world in the next couple of months. I don't know how that would last in a sense if it happened that quickly. I think if this transition from big government to decentralized government, from fiat to crypto, happened in the next couple of months, I don't think it will. But if it did, I don't think that those effects are wanted in the same way that I think people are saying that they want them. I think there's a lot of work to be done on understanding how do we make this a fair society. I think Bitcoin, in the sense of having the mining side of things, what was probably one of the most fairest ways to start a cryptocurrency instead of like an ICO or things like that, where there's like a centralized company that's providing liquidity discounts and things like that. But at the same time, I think there is a disproportionate amount of early adopters and early users, whether it's through mining or through purchasing Bitcoin when it was sub $10 or sub $100, that will, in my opinion, have some pretty fundamental wealth moving forward. And how do we ensure that they use that wealth for good causes and not bad causes? And I don't know the answer to that question, but it's definitely something that keeps me up at night.
At the same time, we do not know how much Bitcoin everybody owns unless they reveal their public keys and we are able to check. There is no way to know when they mixed something, where they hold it, for how long they have been holding their coins, and how many treasures they are holding them. And there is a Romanian guy, I'm not sure if you heard of him, but his name is Mircea Popescu.
I have not. Just like off the top of my head.
So he owns more than 100,000 Bitcoin.
Wow.
And he was one of the early people who got in. He's a computer scientist of sorts. And a few years ago, he was kind of famous and he got kind of crazy with his ideas. And at some point, he was appointing Bitcoin knighthoods, and he was creating basically noble classes for Bitcoiners, which kind of defeats the whole decentralization point, but he was insane in this regard. And he was kind of like Roger Ver, but back in 2010, 2011. I only gave out the example of his stuff because I know that he hasn't sold anything because he believed in Bitcoin back in the days when it was just unfriendly code that only the knowledgeable could run. And there was no friendly interface to run at the time, but he believed in it and he amassed a huge amount of it and mined it. And I guess he also owned an exchange at some point. And that kind of person is going to be a financial elite without a question. If Bitcoin goes to 100,000 or $1 million, then just imagine owning more than 100,000 Bitcoins. You're obscenely rich, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. But it takes some kind of moral virtue, and it takes some persuasion from the people who know how wealthy you are to actually make you contribute to society in a way which doesn't require government intervention.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think it's always interesting to see the wealth accumulation that's happened. I mean, I don't know how updated it is, but there's a link that's like bitinfocharts.com/top 100 richest Bitcoin addresses. And I don't know if it's necessarily accurate because it's showing here right now that a balance of 100,000 to 1 million Bitcoin only has 4 addresses. So it's definitely interesting to see tools like this that maybe just paint like somewhat of a picture of the wealth that's being created. But another thing it points out is that there's over 10 million, or there's 2,100 addresses that have more than 10 million US dollars in them now, which is a pretty good chunk of change. Obviously, probably not anywhere close to what it would be if you have 100,000 Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, like you said, I don't know if I have like a great answer on how do we fundamentally put together a society in which the wealth disparity is like that. How do like the public services operate and function? Who pays for what? How do people accumulate wealth from a smaller standpoint? So it's definitely something that that kind of fascinates me to see how this will play out. And I think that there's always like an interesting story between people that got in early and then have gotten out, and people that got in late and maybe own more. I think that's something that I talk to my friends about all the time, who were like, well, I wish I would have gotten into this at 2011, 2012. And bought. And it's like most of the people that I know that would have done that would have sold it back in 2012 when it went from $2 to $4 and they made double their money. So I think it takes a special person to hold that amount of value. And I think in this day and age, it takes someone who has considerable fiat wealth as well. There's not that many people, but I'm sure someone who got in that early where they have 100,000 Bitcoin probably can function and make a life through just Bitcoin. And I know there's people in America that do that, but I think the average majority of people still need some type of fiat wealth to pay their rent, their car bill, their mortgage, their student loan, whatever it may be. So I think that's always like the interesting piece is people who think they would have gotten early who would have held at the same time. And the people who got in late but just had more fiat to put in. I know people that did get in early in 2012, 13, 14, and have considerable holdings. And I know people that got in 2015, 2016, and even 2017, where their prices were drastically different, but had deeper pockets in order to buy more Bitcoin. So I think the distribution of wealth in Bitcoin terms is definitely something to keep our eye on moving forward.
Anyway, I guess it's not worse than what we have with the Rockefellers and all the rich families, as we have a handful of people who can basically purchase entire countries.
Yeah, I mean, you see that in America as well. Like JP Morgan bailed out America. So when our country literally couldn't pay back its debts, we went to private citizens and had to take out loans. So I think I think people will always accumulate wealth. I think greed is an emotion that's not going anywhere anytime soon. But I genuinely believe that there's typically enough people who act in good faith and who generally want society to succeed and advance that will find solutions to to some of those issues. And I think that's also the tricky thing about Bitcoin and crypto is you needed those early adopters that got in, that the price was half a penny, 50 cents, $1, $2, $4. Without those people, we wouldn't be sitting at whatever we're at now, 9,900 or 10K roughly. So I think it's kind of like a trade-off, because without those people, I don't know if the adoption would have spread as quickly, as fastly, or at all. But then also, how do we monitor that situation so that people who got in early don't necessarily create the system that we're trying to fight against? And I think that's another aspect of it is I think there's some people that got so fed up with our current system that wanted to get in early on the next system so that they weren't in the minority who was getting crushed by the system. So definitely an interesting topic, and something that I don't know if I have a good solution for, but something that will be certainly interesting to see play out.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the most fascinating topics. As we are using this, it's interesting, but where does it lead? Eventually, the purpose of Bitcoin is to overtake the financial system. But it's up to us as a community, and as, I guess, all of us are early adopters up until the point it becomes mainstream. So we have to establish this kind of culture where we take care of projects and we take care of our own. Like we have seen the case of Hadlonat, with people donating for his legal defense.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to mobilize and donate whenever is possible and whenever is needed. I have also seen a similar initiative with BTC server, which BTC Pay, which was supposed to receive an implementation over Tor. And I guess the soft cap for the fundraiser was $10,000, and it was accomplished in 24 hours, roughly.
Yeah, that was what, yesterday?
A couple of days ago.
Okay, yeah, I thought it was this week. Yeah, I mean, I think you see multiple examples of that. There's something that was in America as well. I'm not sure if you heard of the Pineapple Fund.
No.
But yeah, it was a project by some anonymous individuals, which actually gave away over 5,000 Bitcoins to over 60 different charities in December of 2017. So like right during the kind of the hype and the craze. So I think there's people who genuinely want to see good in this world, and I think giving them funds to be able to actually make impact can help. So I think that there's definitely different ways, whether it's through philanthropy, whether it's through charity, that people are actually trying to give back and help build a better world. And I think it takes a level of wealth to be able to do so. As you see with traditional fiat, if you don't have enough money to make sure you have a roof over your head and food in your stomach and kind of like that basic sense of fundamental security, then you can't really give money away. So I think as the price, especially relative to the USD, increases in Bitcoin, you'll start seeing people that realize that they have maybe more wealth than they ever imagined or ever will need, and we'll try to give some of that away, even in traditional like fiat. I think it's called like the sharing pledge or something like that, where like Bill Gates and some other billionaires have come together to collectively give away over 50% of their net worth. Obviously, we're talking about people that are worth tens of billions of dollars. So I don't think they're concerned about where their food's coming from or having a roof over their head. But I think it's just another example that I think when people get a disproportionate amount of wealth and have the house or the car that was kind of their dream, or whatever that meant for them, that people are willing to give money away, especially when it can have a big impact on other people.
Yeah, I agree. I guess at some point the market decides, and that's not up to us to intervene, as you'll have philanthropists emerging naturally, because we all want what we cannot have. And when you are obscenely wealthy, I guess you're hated by the community and you're not popular, and you're going to try to buy their sympathy.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I think that's definitely the case in a few different examples. but maybe I'm just ignorant. But I'd like to believe that in addition to boosting public image, that like with the Pineapple Fund, for example, it was all anonymous. So it wasn't something where people said, "Okay, I'm Dan and I'm giving 100 Bitcoin away." It was all like anonymous donations, and it was an anonymous kind of organization that started it and gave the money away, and the charities that the money was given to was voted upon. So I hope to believe that there is, in addition to the people that think that they can just give money away to kind of boast their image, people that just genuinely don't care about that image. But it might be a different sidestep because we don't really have like the fanfare around Bitcoin wealth to that extent as we do with like traditional wealth, where you have like the Forbes list and billionaire list and millionaire list and all these things that are prime examples of people that want the publicity for having wealth. I think the general, and maybe it's an OPSEC protection in the sense that I think people that have obscene amounts of wealth generally, maybe not obscene, maybe those guys are a little bit different, but I think people that maybe have 100 Bitcoin to 1,000 Bitcoin, which may not be 100,000, but I think it is still a pretty good chunk of change, are generally not promoting the fact that they have these types of holdings or going around kind of flaunting it. But I guess my point is I hope, and maybe I'm just blissful ignorance, that there are some people out there that are genuinely willing to give back to the less fortunate and understand that they're in a position that gives them the ability to do so.
I think one of the people who is most charitable in the space is Fluffy Pony.
Yeah.
He lives in South Africa and he gives money to a lot of charities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. Like, I've luckily been associated with a few different charities and donate time and money of a summer camp that's actually coming up in a few weeks here in California that's for kids that have either lost a parent or a sibling, that a bunch of volunteers actually go and spend a week with these kids. And it's all kids that are going through the same thing, showing them that there's people there and things like that. So that's not meant to be a selfless plug, but meant to be that I think people are trying to donate, and some people have time, and some people have money, and some people have both. And I think as long as you're giving back to people that are less fortunate, there's not a right way to donate or a right way to help people.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure if I have any more questions for you at this point. I guess you wanted to discuss the issue of Bitcoin maximalism earlier.
I mean, it's up to you. I'm game for a little bit more. It's getting a little. It's getting 12:45 my time, so getting a little late. But it's up to you. I mean, if you have any more questions, I'm happy to walk through them. I don't know if you have like repeat guests on, but maybe 6 months from now we can have another chat and kind of see if the questions change or if there's additional stuff to talk about. So I'm game if you have anything else that comes to mind.
Well, I guess we have covered a lot, and it's been more than 90 minutes, an hour and a half. And I right now, a quote by Alfred Hitchcock crosses my mind about the length of films, which is supposed to be proportional with the human bladder.
I definitely feel that quote a little bit. Plus, I don't know how interesting I am to your users and to your viewers. So maybe an hour and a half is way more than enough time for people to hear me blabber on and talk through my ideas. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm more than welcome to set up another call with you, maybe 6 months from now or a year from now, and kind of just check in and see. Obviously, I want to connect with you throughout that time period, but maybe it'd be interesting to do like a 6 months from now like rerun of this episode and see if anything's changed or if there's new developments or things like that. So yeah, it's up to you. I don't know if you have like a closing question or something maybe we can wrap up about. But either way, it was definitely I'm always game to give away my thoughts and opinions and ideas, and I'm sure some of them are right and wrong, and some of them people agree with and don't disagree with. But I think the more conversation that we can have around these topics and issues, at least it gives people more data points to go off of, or more more opinions to use for their own education or how they think about things. So always happy to chat with you.
Okay, so I guess that if people listen up to this point, then they must really like you, and they must be interested in contacting you. So how can they reach you?
Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Hannum, DHANNUM8. So I'm pretty active on there when I can, whether it's sharing random blurbs or retweeting articles or things like that. So pretty active on Twitter. And then our website is hannumcapitalmanagement.com, spelled the same way, HANNUM capitalmanagement.com. So you can reach us on our website or reach me personally through Twitter. Always happy to talk crypto with anyone who's interested. And yeah, hopefully we have some people that stuck it out or couldn't find a way to exit out of the video and somehow are still watching and got some value out of it. And hopefully my rambles were cohesive to give someone some value.
Also, I have this kind of campaign during the podcast in which if I get any donation in Bitcoin, it's going to get half of it is going to go to the guest, just because your time and your insights are valuable. But if you don't want to get the BTC, which never really happens, honestly, I have only received a donation a couple of times and it was about $50. But if it happens, do you have any kind of charity or cause which you want to donate?
I actually do. So yeah, if someone's willing to donate their Bitcoin, I would gladly not accept any for my own personal use. But the camp that I was mentioning is a camp called Experience Camps. And like I said, it's a camp for kids that have either lost a parent or a sibling. That's located in about 5 different locations throughout the United States. We've actually partnered with OpenNode to accept Bitcoin donations, and you can actually donate through Experience Camp's website, and that's Experience EXPERIENCE.camp/Bitcoin. So if you're interested in making a donation, or if someone makes a donation to you, I would love for my sliver to go towards Experience Camp. It's something that I'm very passionate about. I lost my father at a young age and didn't have that support network, and hopefully helping some of these kids learn that there's more people out there that are going through the same things, and giving them the tools and just the mental security to know that they have a network of people that are supporting them and there for them. So yeah, that'd be my plug.
Oh, that sounds really nice. And right now I feel bad that I haven't asked you about this earlier on during the show, because I'm not sure how many people will hear this, but I can add a link in the description.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll DM you the link, so just so you have it. Yeah, it's definitely something that hits home for me in a bunch of different ways. I volunteered for the last couple of years, and I've been donating. The Bitcoin donations just became live about a month ago. We have another volunteer that's part of the Blockstream crew. So was lucky enough to speak with the OpenNode guys and get the Bitcoin donation set up for this camp season. So it's definitely an organization that definitely provides a lot of value to me, and hopefully my time helps some of these kids kind of go through some of the battles that they're dealing with, whether it's through depression or anxiety or suicide or drug use. It's just something that really affected me when I was younger, of not having kids around me that were going through the same things, of losing a parent. And when I learned about their organization, it was a no-brainer to get involved. And I'll be volunteering in about 2 weeks through an 8-day camp in California. And then there's a couple camps in Maine and New York and Georgia and Florida. So yeah, if anyone's listened to us this long, I would love for some donations to go, whether it's through Fiat, you can put in $5, $10, or through Bitcoin. It would be greatly appreciated.
Okay. So thank you very much, Dan. This was a great podcast. And I hope we'll do that second episode in 6 months or 1 year.
Yeah, Vlad, it was a pleasure to connect with you. I'm glad we had the opportunity to chat and find a time that worked, and I look forward to keeping in touch during that duration, and would be more than honored to be able to come back 6 months from now and then run through some things with you.
Okay, so sleep tight, and I'll catch you later.
Sounds good. Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.